Loved him dearly. But he also took my wife, who I loved.
January 9th, 1988, Jefferson Township, New Jersey. Thomas Sullivan Sr. had been under the weather for a few days by the time Friday night came around. Still feeling unwell, he said goodnight to his wife of 10 years, Betty Ann, and went to bed early, hoping that some more rest might bring him relief. A few hours later, he is jarred from sleep by the sound of a loud, irksome beeping. After a moment, he registers that it's the smoke detector going off and that his wife had not come to bed. As Thomas springs to his feet, he hears what sounds like the front door of his house being slammed shut. Smoke hangs in the air in the living room, and it appears as though the couch is on fire. Rushing toward it, he sees balled-up newspaper burning on the floor beyond the couch, surrounded in a circular orientation by several books that are also aflame. He beats at the flames with a couch pillow and stomps frantically on the burning paper. When they seem to be mostly extinguished, he steps out onto his front stairs and sees his car stuck in a snowbank across the street. Disoriented, Thomas returns briefly to stomping on the still smoldering books, then runs from the house. As he crosses the street, he sees a neighbor's house alit with people clearly moving about within. He bangs on the door. Chris Eastman, a teenager home from school on winter break, answers, and Thomas bursts in frantically asking for help. His house is on fire, and he doesn't know where his wife is. Chris's friend, Bobby Kennedy, calls 911, as two of his brothers, Stuart and Michael Kennedy, accompany Thomas back to his house. When they enter, they work to extinguish some of the books that had rekindled in Thomas's absence. Just then, his 10-year-old son Brian emerges from his bedroom. Stuart remains with Brian while Michael and Thomas search the first floor of the house. Growing increasingly distressed, Thomas is unable to locate his wife or his older son. He and Michael then proceed to the basement. Thomas leads the way. Halfway down the stairs, he stops suddenly and runs back up to the first floor in hysterics. Michael follows as Thomas grabs Brian and rushes him to a neighbor's house. As they return to the Sullivan home to await the arrival of police, Thomas looks at Michael with a wild desperation and says, "Tommy did this." At about 10:40 p.m., Officer Bart McConley gets a call about a man who can't find his wife. Driving cautiously through the accumulating snow, he arrives at 82 White Rock Boulevard in minutes and sees a dozen people gathered outside. Having grown up in Jefferson, McConley approaches his friend, Stuart Kennedy, and asks what's going on. Stuart says only that, quote, "She may need a first aid kit. They say she's bleeding." With no inkling as to what he's walking into, McConley enters the house, followed by Stuart, and announces himself as he notices the smoldering books on the carpet. Seeing no one on the first floor, he proceeds to the basement with his gun drawn. As he and Stuart make their way down the stairs, they see a woman lying on the cement floor in a pool of blood that is still spreading. Stuart begins to dry heave as McConley approaches and leans over her, not knowing if he will need to administer CPR. He registers that the victim is 37-year-old Betty Ann Sullivan and that the back of her head has been caved in. He carefully rolls her over and is aghast to see one of her eyes hanging grotesquely from its socket. Almost mechanically, he notes a weight plate that's been removed from a barbell beside the body and assumes that this had been the instrument used to cause the damage he's now witnessing. McConley calls for backup and paramedic support, then sets about searching each room in the house for potential perpetrators. He finds no one there. Officer Bruce Seibel arrives at around 11 p.m. As he examines the burnt books in the living room, Thomas Sullivan Sr. bursts through the front door. He snatches up a framed photo from a table and rushes toward the officer as he exclaims, quote, "My son did it. He killed my wife, and he tried to burn the house down." After calming Thomas down, Officer Seibel proceeds to the basement and comes upon Betty Ann's brutalized body. He reels at the dehumanizing level of violence that has taken place. She'd been stabbed multiple times in the chest, neck, and face, and her arms are covered with severe defensive wounds. She had then been stabbed many times after succumbing to the attack and collapsing to the floor. Horrified, Seibel observes that the sliced skin on her face had been peeled back, as though someone had intended to remove it. The brutality was staggering. As officers finish clearing the crime scene, they gather to discuss what they've seen. The critical question quickly arises: where is Tommy Jr.? Noting that Tommy had not gone to sleep as his bed is still made, officers put out an APB and promptly begin their search for the missing boy. Assuming due to the cold that he would not be outside, they first search the houses on the block, but come up empty. A larger-scale foot search is then initiated. At around midnight, Thomas Sr. and Brian are taken to the police station for official statements and questioning. Brian states that he and Tommy had watched TV together from about 8 to 10 p.m. before his mother sent him to bed. Not too long after, he had to use the bathroom. When he got there, he saw Tommy washing his hands. A bloody towel hung from the sink, and there was blood on his brother's hands and clothing. When he asked what was going on, Tommy agitatedly told him not to worry about it and to go back to bed, but to be sure not to wake their father. He'd cut his hand, he said, and their mother was going to take him to the hospital. Brian was frightened, but he did as he was told. Police continue to search the area, which includes a 200-unit condo development that is still being constructed. They work their way cautiously through each unit, still uncertain as to whether Tommy has been kidnapped or harmed and is still in the company of a perpetrator. They hope, as does the rest of the neighborhood, that he is still alive. Many pieces of this still unfolding puzzle remained missing, but Tommy would certainly be the key to discovering what had happened at the Sullivan house that night. "14-year-old Thomas Sullivan Jr., known as Tommy, was a bright boy who excelled in school and in sports. Attending church regularly with his family, where he also performed the duties of an altar boy, he was well known to the people of Jefferson. He had a paper route, was a dedicated Boy Scout, and was a standout athlete in baseball and wrestling at Reverend George A. Brown Memorial School in the nearby town of Sparta. Around Thanksgiving of 1987, Tommy's 8th grade history class was assigned a research project about the great religions of the world. Tommy chose Mormonism, but a classmate named Chucky daringly suggested Satanism. After the subject was approved, Tommy, being familiar with the idea of the Antichrist from his exposure to Catholicism, and intrigued by an opportunity to explore the dichotomy of good and evil, chose Satanism as well. He collected study materials that delved into occult subjects like satanic rituals, demonology, secret societies, and paranormal phenomena, with his research reaching well beyond what would be required to complete the assignment. Tommy also began spending more time with Chucky. They listened to heavy metal music together, and Chucky introduced him to some taboo ideas that drove Tommy to the library. There, while poring over microfiche, he became aware of boxes of old books stored in the basement, some of which had originated in a dark place not far from where he currently sat. Chucky also alerted Tommy to certain happenings that took place on nearby Clinton Road, a dark, winding 10-mile stretch through the mountains of northern New Jersey. He told Tommy about the nefarious events that took place at the ruins of Cross Castle in the woods off of the road. The lure was irresistible to Tommy. At the time, satanic worship in such places was an unfortunate reality in New Jersey. Having been to Cross Castle myself, and having stood before the portions of the walls and the full basement that remained intact, I saw the melted candles, the makeshift altars, and the remains of sacrificed animals that were left there. Personal belief aside, satanic worship and rituals were taking place in the woods around us during the dark of night. Tommy slept over Chucky's house one night, and they snuck out, braving the freezing temperature as they rode their bikes several miles to Clinton Road. Whatever it was that Tommy experienced while at Cross Castle further fueled his growing obsession. During his research, Tommy was exposed to something, or a confluence of things, that resonated with him in a paradigm-shifting way. Changes in his thinking, and soon after in his behavior, would become shockingly apparent to everyone in his life. Over the next few weeks, he became argumentative and rebellious, shut his parents out almost completely, neglected his church commitments, and found himself benched in wrestling for being too aggressive at practice. After his late-night visit to Cross Castle, Tommy had library staff assist him in accessing the archived books in the basement. He was in search of specific materials he'd learned may have been donated by Cross's wife after his death. It's believed that he found what he was looking for, and that he stole many of these books that were not available for checkout. He immersed himself, unafraid and voracious, in these occult materials, which included grimoires. A grimoire is a book of magic, usually handwritten, that contains instructions for practicing occult arts, including commands for summoning demons to the human realm. Back at school, Tommy was permitted to compete in the annual winter wrestling tournament. He won his first 2 matches, but found himself outclassed in the semifinal match. Behind on the scorecard and close to being pinned, something dark erupted within him. With a primal fury, he reversed the position and placed his opponent in an illegal arm lock. As he torqued maniacally, the boy's arm snapped. The match was halted immediately, and onlookers noticed that Tommy acted disoriented, as though unaware of what had happened or even where he was. Tommy was duly kicked off of the wrestling team, and a report was filed with the school, but police were not notified. On December 28th, Tommy wrote about experiencing feelings that were not his own, that took his mind to dark and disturbing places. Appearing sleep-deprived and detached at school one day, he was sent to the nurse, but cut the rest of the school day. He would cut school a couple more times that week as his dark feelings persisted. His parents asked what was happening and how they could help, but he brushed them off, telling them that they wouldn't understand. By this time, when Tommy looked into the mirror, he no longer saw himself but the visage of a demon. On Friday, January 8th, he would share with a friend his most recent recurring dream. The devil came to him wearing his face to deliver a very ominous message. The prevailing belief in the neighborhood on the morning after the tragedy was that Betty Ann had been murdered and Tommy had been kidnapped. In a state of panic, parents kept their children under lock and key as the police investigation continued. At around 9:15 a.m., a woman was on the phone with her girlfriend who happened to be a police officer. As they spoke about the very jarring happenings of the previous night, the woman glanced outside. At the furthest reach of her snow-covered yard, she saw what appeared to be a human form sitting on the ground, leaning against her shed. When police arrived, they witnessed an ungodly scene. It was Tommy Sullivan sitting there, and his body had been inhumanly brutalized. Blood spatter covered the fence next to him, as well as the side of the shed around his head and upper torso. Standing just beyond the extent of the bloody snow, they observed that both of his wrists had been sliced to the bone, with one so badly damaged that it had snapped back, deformed in the wrong direction. A small Boy Scout knife rested in his other hand. Examining Tommy's face, which hung back so unnaturally that his chin pointed skyward, they were presented with the indelible image of his gaping throat, having been cut from ear to ear, so deeply that they could see down into his windpipe and esophagus, both of which had been completely severed as the wound extended to his spine. How could a 14-year-old boy have done this to himself? It seemed to defy both psychological and physical logic. Officers are further vexed by the presence of only a single set of footprints leading to his location. From all appearances, Tommy had run from the car straight to this spot and ended his life with nearly inconceivable brutality. In the car, police now knew that he had recklessly backed into the snowbank. They found what appeared to be a handwritten contract. When Tommy returned to school after Christmas break, his peers barely recognized him. His words and actions were unsettling and created a concern for him that soon reached the faculty. It was discovered that he and Chucky had cut gym class one day. When pressed by the principal, Chucky admitted that Tommy had been trying to convince him to take part in occult practices and to become a disciple of Satanism. Though Tommy urged him aggressively, Chucky had refused. The principal then confronted Tommy with what Chucky had told her and asked for an explanation. He looked at her emotionless and said only, quote, "It's too late." His mannerism and his words chilled her to such a degree that she actually questioned whether he was being possessed by something. Not yet ready to accept Chucky's refusal, Tommy wrote him a letter. The text was written backwards and in the name of the demon of lust and damnation. Quote, Chuck, the power of all deadly sins dwells within my soul. Do you want in? This is your last chance. Write back now. The principal requested an urgent meeting with Betty Ann Sullivan, who was a faithful volunteer at the school. She told Betty Ann about the incident with Chucky and about the genuine concerns Tommy's classmates and teachers had for her son. Betty Ann indicated that she and her husband were already well aware of his issues. The principal sympathized and encouraged her to speak with Tommy again about his behaviors and the troubling beliefs he had been professing at school. The following night, Tommy watched TV with Brian while their mother did the laundry. After Brian is sent to bed, few specifics are known as to what transpired. It is believed that Betty Ann confronted Tommy about his behavior, and though his exact reaction is not known, it's painfully obvious that he was not receptive to her concerns. Whether a heated argument took place or Tommy ignored his mother, we know that Betty Ann eventually returned to the basement to finish doing the laundry. Tommy may have told her that he was going to bed, then hid in the basement, or he may have followed her there during their argument, but at some point, he launched a frenzied, evil attack on his mother that resulted in her death. It is unclear, due to the severity of the damage done to Betty Ann, what had forced her eye from its socket, the strikes to her head with the weight plate, or the blade of her son's Boy Scout knife. Regardless, it was a very clear case of overkill. Tommy then retrieved several of his occult books and some newspapers from his bedroom and ignited a blaze in the living room that was meant to consume his sleeping father and younger brother before fleeing the house. The contract police found in the car at the crime scene read as follows. To the greatest demons of hell, I, Tom Sullivan, would like to make a solemn exchange with you. If you give me the most extreme of all magical powers, I will use them wisely to tempt as many people as possible to do evil and follow you. I will kill many Christian followers who are serious in their beliefs, although I will not kill my family until I have lived 10 years from this very day. This will be done to avoid any neighbors from becoming suspicious, not out of love for them. Throughout my new life, I promise to perform any Satanistic ritual except homosexual acts. I will do these to prove my loyalty to the demons of hell. Exactly 20 years from this day, I promise to commit suicide. At this time, I will go directly to hell to work with you as a demon. I will tempt all teenagers on earth to have sex, have incest, do drugs, and worship you. I believe that evil will once again rise and conquer the love of God. If this pact is to your approval, sign below. The section on the contract that refers to the killing of his family in 10 years is crossed out with a large X, and parentheses are added in the margin. Quote, I have already killed my family. When police searched Tommy's room, they located a rosary ring with a string tied to it. Traditionally worn on a finger, Tommy had been wearing it as a necklace with the cross inverted, a clear mockery of what it is intended to represent. They then discovered his drawings, which included pentagrams, the devil, and depictions of demons dismembering people with large daggers. They evidenced a fairly sophisticated understanding of the elements of Satanism and a clear intent to call upon dark forces in a search for otherworldly power. In Tommy's desk at school, police located a journal that his English teacher was having students keep to record their personal daily thoughts. Tommy's journal began with sketches of cartoon characters and mundane scribblings, but became progressively more disturbing. In entries that were meant only for him, his obsession with Satanism was made crystal clear in these pages. An entry written 2 days before he murdered his mother and ended his own life read, quote, Today is really cool. I really do hate God and love. The devil is my idol. I will rise and conquer the good of mankind for eternity. And when the apocalypse comes around, I will descend to hell to fulfill Lucifer's will. Well, I really do have to go now, so bye, end quote. Tommy had shared with a friend on the day before the tragedy that the disturbing message delivered to him in his recurring dream where the devil visited him wearing his face was to murder his family and become one of Satan's infernal acolytes. When prominent New York banker Richard James Cross came to New Jersey in 1907, he chose that particular plot of land for his 40-room castle because he believed that he would be able to experience dark occurrences there. He adorned his home with occult books, scrolls, and paraphernalia, practiced paganism, and performed rituals as he penned his own grimoire. During one of the eyes wide shut type parties he would host there for the New York elite, though no proof was ever found, the murder of a young woman during a pagan ritual was reported by a contractor working on his grounds. The daughter of a New York socialite also went missing there and was never found. Cross would die after living in his castle for only a couple of years, but the lore surrounding his property would live on. Over the subsequent decades, Clinton Road would become more frequently traveled, and its modern lore began. Teens visited the lightless road at night and returned to report their experiences, sightings of or encounters with dark entities and ghosts. When Tommy Sullivan visited Cross Castle for a second time in late December of 1987, then deep into his occult studies, many believed that he had performed a ritual of his own. This made sense in light of the contract he had written, the reading materials he'd stolen, and the grimoires found both in his room and in the circle of fire in the family living room, which explained that demons could be called upon for specific purposes. Tommy very likely felt a connection with Cross, seeing him as a kindred seeker. As it's believed that Tommy had come into possession of some of his books, it is also believed that the books he'd set alight with the intent to kill his father and brother included Cross's own personal grimoire. With some of the books having been stolen prior to police securing the crime scene, however, this could never be verified. The Sullivan tragedy thrust the town of Jefferson into a spotlight where it joined many others during a moral hysteria that gripped suburban America, dubbed the Satanic Panic. This was a frenzy marked by widespread fears of satanic ritual abuse and cult activity. Video games, movies, and music would come under fire for corrupting impressionable youth, promoting violence, and spreading satanic or occult influences. Fearing that their children could be next in the headlines, concerned parents in Jefferson assembled at town hall meetings to learn about Satanism from experts in the field and to confront the idea of evil as a force with the potential to take their children from them. Prior to the funeral service for Betty Ann and Tommy Sullivan, police went through training to learn about Satanism and about the cults that may wish to recover Tommy's body from its grave. Believing that the soul of the devil had lived within it, his bones would be invaluable in their rituals. Officers were thus assigned to the burial service and posted at the gravesite for a time thereafter. Television journalist Geraldo Rivera then showed up in town with his camera crew. He was reporting on national cult activity such as grave robbing, the defacing of churches, animal mutilations, and murders being committed in the name of the devil. He spoke with Detective Paul Hart and visited the basement of the Sullivan house, where, before a national audience, Hart described the brutality of the murder that had taken place there, and the equally disturbing suicide of the boy who'd done it.
Tommy died as brutally as his mother did, but at his own hands.
What did Tommy then manage to do to himself? What wounds did he inflict on himself to kill himself?
His first self-inflicted wounds were a series of wounds to his wrists, 3, if I remember correctly, deep enough to actually sever the arteries and the tendons in his arm, enough to snap back his wrist. And after doing that, he literally slit his throat from ear to ear with this 3.5-inch knife from the windpipe all the way back to the spinal column, and to the point of almost taking his head off.
Amidst the media attention, Thomas Sr. moved to Florida with Brian. Within weeks, their house was up for sale, and no one in Jefferson would ever see them again. The only subsequent news they would hear came in 1998, when it was reported that Brian had taken his own life at the age of 21. They heard that he'd joined the military at some point and that his death may have been a drug overdose, but no one knew anything for sure. Detective Hart later recalled speaking with Chucky years after the tragedy. Things had resonated very different with him due to his close involvement with Tommy. He struggled with issues into his adulthood and would ultimately take his own life as well. It has also been said, though it's difficult to confirm since such information is generally not public record, that in the 2010s, the grown daughter of the family that then lived in the Sullivan house came to visit and committed suicide in the basement for unknown reasons. Media reports in this case, as in countless others tailored neatly for public consumption, had obscured the truth. Over time, the people of Jefferson would reveal a different narrative. Life in the Sullivan household, in reality, was not as peachy as had been initially reported. Tommy was not a stellar straight-A student. He struggled in school, and though he was well-mannered for the most part, he smoked cigarettes, got into scuffles with classmates, was often disruptive in school, and was caught lighting fires in the woods on several occasions. It also turned out that parents on White Rock Boulevard were not particularly fond of Thomas Sr., a man known for his temper and his heavy-handedness with his children. Friends of Tommy's recalled him being in trouble often, fearing physical reprimand from his father and resenting his mother for not protecting he and Brian. Detective Hart reported seeing a note on young Brian's door that read, quote, "Stay out or I'll kill you," which seemed to connote a level of violence that was acceptable in their home. Thomas Sr. was quoted in an article as saying that his wife was a nag who gave their children no breathing space. Though he believed that she was too strict with them, he and Betty Ann did agree that their children's primary role was to obey. As Betty Ann's life revolved around her faith, she forced Tommy and Brian to attend church services and CCD. As a family friend put it, quote, "She jammed Catholicism down their throats, and Thomas Sr. just went along with it, not really caring either way." Tommy's principal later recalled that while speaking with Betty Ann, she asked with frustrated sincerity where she could find the rule book for raising children. She just didn't know how to do it. The principal saw this as a glimpse into life at the Sullivan home. Betty Ann prayed for her family and their problems, but lacked the ability to understand and handle them. It's evident that communication, the lifeblood of interpersonal relationship, was very poor in the Sullivan home. There were no discussions and no compromise. The parents ruled and were not to be questioned. As Tommy got older, he began to rebel, talking back and complaining about having to attend church and Catholic school. He would leave the house often and roam the nearby woods alone. Tommy was angry and he needed help. He needed to be heard by someone. There are some who will never believe that Tommy had committed the crimes. No one who saw the crime scene or the photos taken thereat believed that his wounds could have been self-inflicted. Even the coroner questioned the manner of death due to what he saw during his examination. It was speculated by some that Tommy had, in fact, been killed by the same person, force, or entity that had killed his mother. Further fueling speculation was the behavior of Thomas Sr. on and subsequent to the night of the deaths. Officer McConley pondered how Thomas, who'd been asleep, was so certain that his son had committed the crimes. How was he not awakened by the sounds of his wife's brutal murder taking place in his small one-story home? After extinguishing the fire, he went to a neighbor's house for help before searching for his children. McConley's report indicated that Thomas was, at the very least, suspicious and should be looked at as a serious suspect. He was told by his police chief, however, that he was wrong. It was a clear-cut murder-suicide. McConley has never been able to reconcile how his department arrived at that conclusion so quickly. A close family friend spoke about helping Thomas to clean his basement. Amidst the horrific scene, as they scrubbed his wife's blood from the floor and walls, Thomas did not act at all like a man who'd just lost his wife and son. The friend asked at one point what had happened. What had gone wrong? Thomas blamed everything on Satan, saying that Tommy must have been possessed. That same friend also recalled that when he ran into the Sullivan house on the night of the tragedy, he saw no tears on Thomas's face. He just kept asking why his son would do such a thing and urged police to go find him, saying that he'd run off into the woods. If he'd been sleeping, how would he have known that? Many people who lived near the Sullivans and knew them well believed that Thomas had killed his wife and son. They claimed that the police investigation had been quite minimal, with close family friends indicating that they'd not been asked a single question. To those who felt this way, authorities had accepted the murder-suicide narrative far too prematurely, and their suspicions persist to this day. The case of Tommy Sullivan forced people to question the existence of evil in the world. Does it exist, not just in the actions of humans, but as a force in and of itself? Can it actually overtake people, or do we have to choose it? Regardless of prevailing beliefs since that time, something was happening in New Jersey during the 1970s and 1980s that involved a belief in Satan. John List murdered his entire family in Westfield because he felt that they were straying from their faith and headed for damnation. 16-year-old Jeanette De Palma was killed in Springfield, found on a makeshift altar and surrounded by occult symbols on a cliff called the Devil's Teeth. The 6 murders of serial killer Richard Cottingham, the torso killer, that took place in New Jersey fueled fears of occult involvement due to their brutal nature. 17-year-old James Von Rosgen was found dead at the bottom of a water tower in the Watchung Reservation, known as a hotspot for occult activity. It was never determined whether he'd fell, jumped, or been pushed from the deck of the tower. And, in a case quite similar to that of Tommy Sullivan, a boy named Greg Sanders murdered his parents with an axe. He left the axe buried in his father's head as he fled the house, climbed that same water tower in the Watchung Reservation, slit his wrists, drew a large pentagram on the tower with his blood, and then jumped to his death. In the case of Tommy Sullivan, as reported by his friends, he felt as though he couldn't breathe. He was miserable, with no say in his family and very little say in his own life. The confluence of his Religions of the World assignment, his friendship with Chucky, and his discovery of Satanism opened up a new world to him in which he could seek power and autonomy. This, he believed, would be his release from misery. First shocked by what he encountered, Tommy would learn that this religion approved of things that were denounced in Catholicism, like vices, hedonism, vengeance, and the search for power over others. These elements very likely combined to create the hook that caught him. As God had never provided him with the answers he needed, he charged headlong down a path to oblivion in search of those answers from Satan. Countless kids who grew up in that era rebelled and even drew pictures similar to those Tommy drew. Very few of them would attempt to murder their entire family. He did not seem to be so subjugated that the need to strike back at his oppressors would be so imminent and so violent. The severity of his actions raises a specific question. Was he mentally ill or experiencing psychosis at the time of his crimes? His contract with the demons of hell certainly hints at a level of delusion. Was he experiencing command or visual hallucinations as well? Mental health was still a taboo subject at the time, so Tommy may very well have gone undiagnosed and untreated. The unthinkable level of violence perpetrated during his crimes are certainly in line with a detachment from reality, as we've seen in countless other cases. If he truly believed that he had entered into a pact with Satan and/or his demons, and believed that he would be rewarded for his contemptible acts, then from that perspective his actions aren't quite as incomprehensible. Whether it was a hopeless sense of desperation or a slip into psychosis that led to the tragedy, it is astoundingly clear that Tommy Sullivan did not get the help he needed. With no drugs or alcohol found in his system after his death, he was driven by something else, something he was experiencing deeply, and he remained in a state of crisis until he found an outlet that resulted in a partially fulfilled familicide. Officer McConley, after years of trying to bury the memories, would say he believed that evil had in some way been involved in what transpired at the Sullivan house on January 9, 1988. That wasn't God's work, he said. Thank you for listening.
He told some kids that he had a vision, that Satan came to him, Satan had his face on it. And Satan told him to kill his family and then go out and preach Satanism.